Shanti, everyone. I am a peaceful soul, but I have to admit I'm feeling lots of excitement bubbling up about this conversation that's coming. So we're going to jump into it. Sister Janti, we've got to know each other a little bit the last few years, and Dr. Hux, we're very, very happy to have you join us and know you've had interactions with other people in our Brahmin family around these issues before. So we're really happy to hear from both of you. Those of you who are listening in, if questions come up as we go through the dialogue, please put them in the chat box. We have a few minutes for questions afterwards. And yeah, I think it will be an enlightening discussion. So thank you both for being here. The first question, maybe just a quick one to get us started. There's lots of talk about trauma these days, and I think it's a real thing that so many people are experiencing in the world. But the subtitle of this event is Spiritual Empowerment for Inner Healing. And I wonder if we could just briefly start there. Maybe Sister Janti, you can start. And in your own experience, how has spiritual empowerment supported your journey of healing?
Thank you, David, and Om Shanti to my dear sister Tracy and everybody else also. I began my spiritual journey age 19, and I can imagine that it would have been a very different journey if I didn't have spiritual connection with the divine to be able to draw that power within myself. And different things have happened in my journey that I know for sure would have been impossible to navigate. Decision-making has been an important factor through that connection of empowerment. Another factor has been to be able to tolerate various things that maybe I would have found difficult otherwise, but also to be able to know where I have to stand up for my rights. So it's not just tolerate and be humble. Yes, humility is important, but I also need to know what my spiritual rights are, my spiritual principles are, and have the power to be able to stand up for them. So that's just a brief introduction to the subject.
Lovely, thank you. And Dr. Hux, for you, spiritual empowerment on your journey of inner healing.
First, let me just begin by saying that it's such a privilege to be here with Sister Janti, someone who is such a powerful teacher and author and spiritual leader. I want to say to all who are looking in, the honor is all mine and the wisdom is all hers. So thank you for having me share in this space. For me, spiritual empowerment has kind of meant several things. It meant participation in kind of self-guided readings for me, participation in formal religious organizations, participation in all women empowerment groups, participation in just kind of self-guided practices like meditation. And those things collectively, I think, have helped me to be empowered, but they also have worked to help me to be humble, to know that that life is so much bigger than who I am. And it helped me to be a seeker of answers in a world and in a universe that's so full of mysteries. And it has also helped me to be hopeful that the best of humanity is always before us, and to be courageous, knowing that my life was not meant to just be here for my own self-gratification, but in service to humanity. And that those are the paths that I want my spiritual empowerment to lead me to, in the service for humanity and fulfilling whatever purposes I am to be here and whatever gifts I have to give to others.
Wow, lovely. Thank you very much. I just want to say, give us more from both of you. It's so lovely. We heard about tolerance and humility, standing up for rights, participation, seeking, meditation, such richness in your spiritual journeys. But maybe to focus a little bit, because people are talking about trauma. what would you say are some of the major traumas that people are healing from today? And what do you see as the root cause for those traumas, both for individuals and for the collective? Maybe Sister Janti, you could start.
Thank you. I see that anger in some form or another, in which a child has become a victim, whether through immediate family or whether in a situation like we're seeing in Gaza or in Ukraine, etc. Anger has played a major role in causing trauma. And I see that it's spirituality that can actually bring about healing. But anger seems to be, and violence, these two things are connected, of course, seem to be a major factor. And maybe another one would be suppression, where a person, an individual, isn't allowed to express themselves or to find a path that they feel compatible for their lives. And so they're pushed into a situation where it's not possible for them to express themselves in the way that they would like to. These two factors are the things that I've come across when I'm trying to help individuals in some form or another.
And you've touched on so many things, both those personal childhood experiences and the bigger things happening in the world. Dr. Hux, for you, what do you think people are healing from, and what's the root cause?
When I think about trauma, I think about it as this larger, capacious category where there's the visible trauma that we're facing in the global world of war, famine, political instability. But many people are suffering from the invisible traumas that the world never really sees, that they wear masks, that they cover, and may not even know that they're dealing with senses of trauma. And it's that invisible trauma, that sense that leaves these kind of scars that are often unhealed. And those traumas can take the form of family traumas, things that have happened early in their childhood, or physical traumas that they have endured, sexual traumas for both men and women that I have encountered over the course of my career, of verbal trauma. People have been abused in that way. Relationship traumas also that they're trying to heal and recover from, but also an interesting trauma of feeling a sense of underachievement and unattained dreams and feeling a kind of trauma in their life around that. So I like to think of, most people think trauma is this very broad and extreme thing, but it also is the invisible inner traumas that people are suffering and navigating in their daily lives.
And we think so much about the suffering of trauma, but would you say there's a message in trauma for us? Is there something we can learn from it?
Well, I would say the message in trauma is to always work for your healing, for your wholeness. That to always to be the kind of guiding light out of trauma, that it is not something that is fixed in your life and that you have to live with for the rest of it, but that there is healing, there's transformation, and there's wholeness to be attained.
Sister Janti, for you, the message of trauma?
Maybe the messages, of course, as Dr. Huxer said, but also within that, a process of learning. What is it that I'm learning here? How is it that I can grow and, yes, achieve that state in which I myself can become complete? But also it's a lesson in forgiveness, because when I've been through something, can I forgive the other? Can I also forgive myself? And maybe forgiving the self, because so often we blame ourselves for whatever has happened. And so can I forgive myself, but also have the possibility of, through meditation, reflection, opening up my heart with generosity so that then I can forgive the other also.
Dr. Hux, I see you nodding. Please, comment on.
I wanted to address part of the question that you asked us is what do we see as the root of trauma? And one of the roots I see is fear. Fear that fear of the other, fear that there's not enough in the world of resources, of power, of land, um, fear that that something is disrupting my safety. I think we live with all kinds of inner fears that I think are at the root of so much trauma that human beings are navigating.
And anything, Sister Janty, you'd like to pick up on or amplify that Dr. Hux is sharing?
I'm also seeing how compassion is another ingredient that can come up through that experience. And again, I believe that things start deep inside oneself and then can be expressed outside. And so compassion for myself, of course, but also then compassion for the other. Because if somebody is being the perpetrator of trauma, then what is it that's making them behave the way that they are? And so to have compassion for them in that situation too. So I know that it's not the nicest way to learn things, but yet the way life is at the moment, if I can interpret and reframe it in my own mind and see what it is I've learned from this experience and move forward in my own journey, that would be a positive approach.
Mm-hmm. Very nice. Such richness and reminders of the power of forgiveness and compassion to overcome fear and some of those invisible traumas. Suppression, I think, was mentioned as we engage on these journeys of healing and transformation. There's so much we could follow up on, but I wanted Sister Janty just to ask you a little bit directly in many Eastern religions and within the belief system of the Brahmo Kumaris, we often talk about the law of karma. Could you say a little bit about the interplay between trauma and karma?
A little bit what I was referring to earlier, in the sense that karma is telling me that whatever it is I've done comes back to me in some form or another. And so it's not the only story, it's part of the story, but sometimes that can lead to a state of hopelessness. But if I can turn it around and say, whatever it is that's happened, what can I do today to help myself and to help another? Because karma is not just the acceptance of the past, but it's also the understanding that I have the capacity, I have the power to be able to do what it is I need to do for the future. And so if I've been through trauma, not to get into a position where I just blame myself, but I can forgive myself, but I also understand what it is I need to do today to be able to move forward.
Dr. Hux, I might put you on the spot here a little bit, but when we were planning this, you mentioned that you don't have a lot of experience with this law of karma and the way we talk about karma. After hearing just a brief introduction from Sister Janty, how does that resonate for you? Or any question you might have for hearing more from her?
Well, I think in some ways it's in line with some of the African traditions that I practice. I mean, there's a sense that this is not the only life. This is not the beginning and the end of all life, that it continues. And in African traditions, the sense is that when you live this, you come from the realm of the unborn, you come to this space, you live this life. It's following the sun also. It then sets, you go back into the ancestral world, and you hope to be reborn again into this world. And hopefully in that next rebirth, there are new lessons that you are bringing with you. There's new wisdom that you're bringing with you, and that you are healing something that may have needed to be healed in that past life also. And so I think there is some kind of dialogical space that we have between African traditions and this notion of karma. and the constant, I think, consistency and continuation of life. It's wonderful that you just don't get one chance,
Mhm.
Mhm.
because
Um,
we all feel like we don't come with all the knowledge that we needed this first time.
and maybe one other thing that ties in with all the variety of cultures is this concept of whatever seed I sow, so accordingly will I receive. I reap what I have sown. And so that thread of karma carries through into even concepts that believe in the eternity of the spirit, the continuity of the soul, but not necessarily in the form of rebirth, but especially where there is that continuity within human form. Yes, definitely. It's not just one chance that I have.
So that's some of the good news we're spreading today, is even with these traumas, there's another chance to heal, to transform, to overcome them. Dr. Huggs, in some of your writing, you talk about African heritage traditions as being a spiritual defense for healing and a pathway to healing. Can you say a little bit more about that? Why are those traditions so important to you in your own personal journey?
Well, what I would say, I was trained as historian of religion. So a good bit of my work is going back into the past, into archives, and dealing with the trauma, the collective trauma of the transatlantic slave trade. So that's where a good bit of my work lies. And what I see in those archives are people of African descent throughout the Americas and the Caribbean, trying to really hold on to a sense of their humanity and using their spiritual traditions as a form of defense and protection, whether that defense is knowing how to utilize herbal pharmacopoeia or try to utilize particular African spirits to protect them. But they found themselves in the midst of slavery always having to be in a defensive and a protective posture in a society where they were just seen as property. Um, but what I think really helped to sustain those enslaved Africans was their own understanding of the world, their own understanding of cosmology, that they were connected to the ancestors always, that life was not something that was predestined, but that it can always be negotiated, particularly through divination and offerings. Um, I think that's what kept these many of those who going through that kind of collective trauma so hopeful. In my own life, and I can talk about my own personal trauma, was having to lose my mother at such a young age as a teenager. She worked in New York City public schools in the 1970s and the 1980s. And what we didn't know about at that time was about environmental toxins and what that meant. And she worked in a New York City public school that was filled with asbestos. And New York City, according to the United Teachers Federation, had about 3.5 million tons of asbestos within public schools and public buildings throughout New York City. So my mother and all of the women she worked with and the young teacher that worked nearby in that area all succumbed to these radical forms of a cancer based on something that was so invisible in their environment. And it was having a sense that there must be still a way to connect even beyond the death of the physical body. And I think for me, that was helpful, knowing that um, there's still a portal of connection, that my mother was still present with me. And I think in many ways, African traditions and also indigenous traditions. Her mother was from the Cherokee Nation of North Carolina. So indigenous American traditions, still holding spirit as something that is eternal, really helped to get me through a sense of trauma and continue to have a sense of presence with my mother with me. And I know that I share that with so many people who have lost a parent, especially a mother at a young age.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Sister Janta, you might have a personal experience you'd like to share as well, but before that, Dr. Hux began by talking a little bit about the idea of collective trauma. Is there something like collective karma? And can you talk a little bit about that?
There's definitely collective karma. And one clear example of that is climate change. I can't say you are responsible. 3 fingers are pointing at me and telling me that I'm responsible. But it's not just me alone. It is all of us together collectively. And together we are facing whatever are the dangerous outcomes of the lack of understanding. It was a state of ignorance we had before. But in the last some years, we've had understanding, but we haven't been able to put it through into reality, into practice in our lives. And so we still continue more or less business as usual. So that's one example of collective karma and the collective results of that we're experiencing today. And I think that this is where, how do you heal the elements? How do you put right the story of the last 100+ years that has created this? And it isn't an eternal story. It started maybe 100, 200 years ago with industrialization, but in a state of unawareness, ignorance. And today we do know about it, but we're still not able to rectify things. And so I'd say that, yes, the power of yoga, and yoga not in the form of physical postures, that has its own relevance, and definitely it's very important for health. But in terms of spiritual yoga, Raj Yoga, the connection with the divine, the connection with the supreme, just through the mind and the awareness and the relationship that's built up as a result of that, the power that's generated through God's love, through God's truth, purity, is that I believe it can purify humans, but also all aspects of nature and even the elements of nature, and carry us through a transition to a better world. Now, I won't go into more detail of that, but that's a sort of general idea in terms of collective karma and what we can do about it today, apart from the little steps that we take in reducing our carbon footprint, but also our collective yoga power. And then in terms of my personal life, I feel very grateful that I've been protected in so many ways that I can remember getting upset as a child, but I don't remember any specific trauma. The other thing that I do remember, and again, it's an aspect that I'm grateful for, I came across the trauma of gender imbalance and also the trauma of racism in London in particular, but I suppose could have been anywhere in the world. But I came across both of these things once I had become a meditator and started my spiritual journey. And I think it would have been hugely traumatic if these things had happened prior to that. But my own spiritual journey then gave me the understanding of that inner being, the being of light that I am, located here in the soul. And in this awareness of the soul, I could tolerate the situation of racism, in which there was a lot of discrimination, and I could then remind myself that whatever their behavior is, my behavior has to be on a higher level of consciousness and not reject them or be aggressive with them, but to move into a different dimension in which I could see things differently and understand that, well, today this is what they say, but that's not the reality. I know that in reality, the skin is only 1/18 of an inch thick, and I am that inner being, the being of light. So I didn't allow the racist attacks to pull me down in any way. I was able to maintain my own state of awareness of who I am as a child of God. And so I was very grateful that both pre-meditation I wasn't so exposed, and these things happened after the meditation.
Dr. Hux, anything you'd like to add to that, or any questions for Sister Janti?
Oh, she so much of what she says just resonates with me. I love this sense of the kind of not just a physical yoga, but a kind of spiritual yoga where you're connecting with the divine. I think that's so important when you live in a racialized society. The tradition, one of the traditions that I align with is in the U.S. is New Thought, and it begins with the premise that you are whole, perfect, and complete. And if you begin with that premise, then anything that society tries to map onto you, you realize it's not the truth of who you are, and that you have to hold the truth of who you are, connected to divinity, and knowing that any relationship, any kind of social relationship, any kind of interpersonal relationships that try to diminish that or dehumanize that are not the truth of your reality, that you hold the truth of who you are in that connection to the divine. One of the things that I also like about the African traditions that I study is that they don't begin with a sense of original sin, that you're born into the world in sin, but that you're into the world with the very essence and breath of God, with the Ashe, with the me, that God breathes God's very self and essence into you. And that is where you begin in this life. You're not navigating a sense of, I'm born into this sin, but I'm born into a sense of divinity, that I share that essence with the divine. And having to keep that at the forefront of who you are, I think is one of our biggest challenges, but one of our biggest sources of healing, if we can remember that.
Beautiful, Sister Janti. I see you smiling. What did you like about what you just heard?
Again, I feel that we're resonating so closely in so many different ways, and so total agreement that you can't allow society to change your awareness of who you are, but you have to maintain that identity. And it is a challenge because it slips away so quickly. But yeah, that's what I need to do at all times.
And I think one of the hardest places to do it is often in our interpersonal relationships, to keep that standard for anyone who is entering into your life. The Harvard Divinity School, every year we have a common read where faculty, staff, and student read one book for the entire year. And this year it was Bell Hooks's book, All About Love, New Visions, where she tries to chart new visions of love. And I remember saying into this space a quote that Bell Hooks has where she says, love and abuse cannot coexist. And so I think in any places in our lives, any kinds of relational places in our lives, where we're feeling that they are not honoring us in the fullness of who we are as a sacred being, that we really need to take an inventory of that and really begin to assess whether or not these are the spaces and the communities that best support our wholeness.
Mm. And I think that when I think about the original qualities of the divine, the starting point is that of truth and love, the combination of both, which is why across the world they would sometimes say, love is God, God is love. They would have it interchangeably, and the same for truth. And I love the expression that you used, that God breathed his qualities into us at the beginning. And so, yes, definitely, I would also say that at the start of the journey of every soul, we carry all the qualities of God, a reflection of God. We are the image created in God's love. And so, yes, we carry that within ourselves. And in recent times, we've forgotten this. And it's time to come back to this and awaken it in everyone.
And I think one of the most powerful gifts that we were given was free will.
Yeah.
That we were placed here and and the ability to make choices in your life and to exercise that free will. I teach a book by Iyanla Vanzant. It's called One Day My Soul Just Opened Up. And in that, it's honor yourself with choice. And she's trying to tell her readers that even if you find yourself where choices led you not in a great space, that you can always choose and choose again. And that is great power to be able to choose and then choose again.
Mhm. One of the terms that we use within our own study is the gift that God gives us of a divine intellect. And the purpose of the divine intellect, which sometimes is called the third eye also, but the purpose of this is to be able to see what my choices are. Because in the very narrow perspective of just the body and thinking that I am just this and I am matter, then I don't even see the possibilities that are open to me to choose from. There's a very, very narrow vision of even not just myself, but my choices. And so to be able to go to that awareness of that divinity within the intellect and see the vast spectrum of choices that I have, and then to decide, yes, definitely a beautiful gift.
Beautiful words from both of you. Thank you so much. I like this idea, whole, perfect, and complete at birth, knowing the truth of who we are and having the power to do what we need to do for the future. Those are such powerful statements. And I think just in a short period of time, you've taken this conversation that started with trauma very naturally to an understanding of our eternal selves, our connection with ancestors and others, and thank you for sharing those personal stories, and our connections to the divine. So it seems very much if we stay in that consciousness, we're uplifted, and it will give us the power to deal with the trauma and the anger and the war and the famine and those invisible and suppressed things that you both mentioned that come up as well. But maybe you could each just say a little bit more about your understanding of spirituality and the practice of meditation as an example, and how that can directly help with the damage caused by trauma.
I belong to a weekly meditation group, and we meet weekly. We begin by bringing people into the practice who we want to send light to, who may be going through certain challenges. But what I love at the end of that is we close with in liberating my own being, may I benefit others. And and that piece, I've heard it so many times, week after week, but it's always still renewed to me. One, because it challenges me to continue to liberate my own being, but it also always reminds me that any liberation that of my own being that I may have is always connected to others. And it's always that kind of relational piece, that my responsibility is, yes, for my own liberation of my own being, but it also is about the connectivity, the human connectivity of those who I share this world space with. In about an hour or so, I'll be getting on an airplane and I'll be hearing them say, to put your own oxygen mask on before assisting others. And that's really, we can take that as a spiritual lesson every time we hear that. Put on your own spiritual oxygen mask and then assist others. That is part of the charge of what it means to be a human here. And I'm hoping that each week that we open up that portal, that energy portal, that we are sending it out to the world, to the spaces where it needs to be sent, and helping to heal the areas of the world and the traumas of the world that need to be healed, because this is our collective world. It doesn't matter if something's happening 1,000 miles away, it's still happening to us as we're sharing this life space together.
Lovely.
In the meditation that I practice, first step is to go in to be aware of the inner being that I am, and then to connect with the divine in terms of my relationship with the divine. And there's a beautiful variety of relationships that one can experience. The divine as the mother, as the father, the teacher, the friend, the guide, and it can be any relationship you choose, but also in terms of all the qualities of the divine. And again, a huge spectrum of qualities. And so it's simply a matter of turning my mind away from my day-to-day thinking onto a different plane to go upwards in a sense. And as I connect first through the thinking process, then the thoughts gradually slow down, and there's the experience of receiving that which God would like me to have, that which I'm ready to receive. But those qualities then don't just stay restricted to me. They reach out across into the world. And so this is where, yes, we would also have time to be able to serve the world through the mind. I can't serve on any other level for a long period of time. It would be always limited through words or actions. But through the mind, we can serve everyone, the whole divine human family, but also all of nature. And so that for me is very much akin to what you were saying about being able to not just your own mask, but then also reach out and help others. But yes, first has to be that I make that connection and recharge my own inner battery. And then we have this period that we call Mansa Seva, service through the mind. And that's very, very beneficial. And during COVID times, it became quite prominent within our meditations, because people would be writing to us about their bereavement, or they would be phoning us about someone who was very ill and needed help, different situations. And of course, people from different countries would be saying, my country is in great need for this reason or the other reason. And so we found that we were devoting some of our time each day to sharing thoughts of God's light and love with those individuals or those places. And the beautiful thing is that very often we get feedback, and somebody says, I know that it was everyone's prayers, it was everyone's thoughts of love that helped me go through this situation or helped me heal, and now I'm well again. And of course, when sometimes there isn't recovery, but yet still the power that one has gained from the good wishes of all, that also is supportive on the journey. And if somebody is going through some trauma and we know about it, again, we can just hold them for a moment within that light, and then just stay connected with the light and the source, and let that light reach that individual. And I know that that also for a fact is able to support that individual and help them heal and go beyond that.
David, would I also be able to add that, during our time and our journey here, we're also ambassadors for those who are unborn, for those who will come after us. I spent time in upstate New York, and among the Iroquois Confederacy, they say in our every deliberation, we must consider the impact on the next 7 generations. And so even as we're here sharing this life space collectively with us, we have to also think about those who will come after us, and what do we want to bequeath to them? What will be our bequest? What have we helped to heal and make more whole of this world that they will come in and inherit from us?
Thank you both so much. Such beauty and eloquence in your words, and such authority you've spoken with from your own personal experience, but your experience of many, many years on this spiritual journey and helping others on their journey. So thank you. I think we have to book you back again for another dialogue sometime. But we have a few minutes now, and I haven't been looking at the chat box, but I know Nina's been monitoring it. And maybe there are a few questions that listeners have sent in our last 10 minutes or so.
So I've just noticed that there's one question, and it reads, what can we do about traumas without knowing the reason why? I think you covered that to some extent, but I think perhaps this person would like to have it broken down a bit more.
Sister Janti, would you like to start?
I can feel that there's pain, but I don't know where the pain is coming from. And at the present time, it doesn't seem to be coming from any external source. So I have to understand that maybe it's coming from something from the past that I'm not aware of, because things happen age 1, age 2, maybe even in the womb that I don't know about, but I carry the pain of that. And the way to be able to heal that, the only way that I know of, is through God's love, to be able to keep myself in that state of awareness of the self, the soul, and to allow God's love to reach me and heal me. And maybe also something else would be to do as many kind acts as I can, to do as whatever good deeds that I can, and share uplifting thoughts with others, because the blessing that comes back to me as a result of that, I'm not doing it for that reason, but it works in a very natural, automatic way. The blessings that come also are a great healer.
Dr.
love-
Hux, how would you respond?
Well, I would just add that I would want the person to spend so much more of their time thinking about the value of who they are, rather than what the source of the trauma that might be, and concentrate on the source of who they are, the divine source that create them, and know that there's movement forward out of whatever that unknown, mysterious source of trauma might be. That this kind of self-investigation of one's healing is so much more rewarding than an investigation of the source of trauma. Because even if you found what the source of it, it still may not make sense to you. It still may not be fair to you. And I don't want people to be stuck in quarreling in that space, rather than moving forward into the brilliance and beauty of who they are and what they have to give to this world.
Lovely, lovely. Others, if you have chats, we have time for a few more
There's
questions.
another question here. There are a few that's come in. The impact of trauma on physiology can take souls out of their body in a disassociative way. With God's love and meditation, how does one ground in the body and present moment without becoming body conscious? That's quite a deep one. So, yeah.
Dr. Hux, I saw you nodding when you heard the question. Would you like to respond?
I'll start with that, with looking at a notion of collective trauma. So much of and I'll speak for someone who is of African descent in the United States, where almost 300 years of slavery and only about 152 out of it. So more time enslaved than the history of being emancipated in this country. And I see across the nation and across class how Black women in particular hold trauma in their body, and how it has physiological effects upon them, how they're holding stress in their body. And it is something that is an epidemic and a pandemic, and it's cutting across class lines. It's holding so much and trying to navigate their sense of worth in a society that hasn't created a space for them and to see their worthiness, to see their brilliance, to see them as loving beings. And it causes all kinds of health matters. Black women are dying, are more likely to die of cancer, heart disease, stroke. I mean, and this is something that is so, it is such a real issue in this country. And I just do what I can in the settings that I can to try to encourage them to know that even with the weight of that history and the weight of the current society and the weight of things that are not affirming to you, to try to find that connective space to the divine. I love the musician Sade, and she says it's only love that gets you through. To connect to divine love, to connect in loving spaces, in a world that doesn't always love you, but know that you are worthy in that. But I just wanted to acknowledge whoever asks that question, that there is direct impact on one's physiology and one's psychology, one's mental health in context of societal trauma.
Yeah, there seems to be quite a few questions, and I'm not sure whether or not it's allowed in terms of the amount of time we have left. I'm just going to read one, and David, you can give me directions as to about timing. I like what you said about sending healing vibrations. There are many earthquakes at the thirst of this moment across the world, sending healing, love of God. Is there anything else? I think perhaps you've touched on those already. There's another one which says, how do we learn to accept unchangeable trauma? And Professor Hux, I think you touched on that as well. For example, difficulties with disability and so on. There are quite a few questions. It's a very, very important topic. It's a very deep topic, and many questions are there. And so perhaps, this is actually telling us that we need to have another session like this somewhere, somehow, to be able to continue this conversation. Thank you.
And maybe some of those questions we can take into the small group discussions. We're going to have an hour of small group workshops, and we won't have the benefit of Sister Janti and Dr. Hux there directly, but collectively, I think we can have some discussion about those things. I'd love to negotiate for more time, but the planes, I know they don't wait, and Dr. Hux needs to go. So maybe I'll just ask each of you in the last minute or so, any final words from you about the power of spiritual empowerment for healing trauma? What would you like people to go home with in a last minute or so of your time? Dr. Hux?
I would say always know who you are and whose you are, that you are a direct descendant of divine spirit and being, and that is untouchable. That is untouchable. And live your life with that kind of courage, of the untouchability of the essence of who you are.
And just to continue that theme, actually, but just to know that you, the soul, the child of God, have a right to God's love and God's truth and God's power. So just take advantage of that, because it's open for you to take.
Lovely, beautiful. Thank you both so much. I could go on for a long time in giving you thanks, because it was a very, very rich discussion. But I would like to just share with you a little blessing card, a good wishes card, coming from our ancestors around the world, but particularly from the African continent. I'm just moving it around here. Dr. Hux, when you say stop, we'll get a special blessing for you.
Stop.
So this is from the Tugen people of Kenya. And I'm not going to ruin the pronunciation. I don't know if there's any Tugen speakers with us today, but the meaning of this blessing is you bring peace and unity to the community by tirelessly kindling the fire, bringing people together to discuss and resolve conflicts, and by having good wishes for all. So that's a special blessing for you. And I think we heard you talk about participation earlier on today. So I think this fits very well. Sister Janti, for you, just tell me
Okay.
when to stop.
Stop.
This is a Fulfulde saying from West Africa, Munyal Dafen Hare. And the meaning is you are filled with unlimited patience. Like a stone that takes time to be cooked, you are not rushed or anxious for others to change.
I take it as a blessing because it's not what I am, but I hope to be.
So thank you again both so much. I know, Dr. Hux, you have to catch an airplane, so we'll let you take off and safe journey. And Sister Janti as well. So we wish you both safe journey, and we do hope we can have you together again for another dialogue sometime in the future.
And David, I just wanted you to know I'm going to actually continue some of these difficult conversations. I'm traveling to Tulsa, Oklahoma, where in 1921 they had a race massacre. And so there's an annual lectureship commemorating that moment when African Americans were massacred in an area of Tulsa, Oklahoma. And so I'm going there to be with descendant communities and an academic community to commemorate that trauma. But again, see how do we work out a collective historical trauma into future healing.
All good wishes.
Maybe, Sister Janti, do you have just 1 minute to guide us in a little meditation, and maybe we can send some good energy with Dr. Hux on her journey?
Yeah, sure. Stepping into the awareness of who I am, I feel the inner being and the light of the inner being shine. And I come to that awareness of peace within. And I know that from the ocean of peace, peace and love are reaching out to all those in need. Om Shanti.
Om Shanti, thank you both so much. Safe journeys, be blessed.